You wake up on a grey Tuesday with a scratchy throat. You do the thing everyone does now. You open your phone, type your symptoms into a search bar, and scroll past 3 pages of websites that all want you to panic. Somewhere in the middle, a result catches your eye. It is not about the flu. It is about your genome. Apparently, somewhere between 1 and 4% of your DNA might come from Neanderthals. You stare at that number for a second. Then you close the app and go make coffee. But here is the thing. That number is not trivia. It is a fossil record written inside the body. It is part of the reasons some immune systems react to viruses a little differently. It may have shaped skin, blood, disease, risk, and the way cells respond to stress. It is also the answer to a question people have asked since the first Neanderthal bones were found. Did they really disappear? Here is the promise of this video. We are going to meet 3 things. An immune gene that predates most of our ancestors, a fragment of skin-related DNA that still influences bodies today, and a genome project that started with bone powder from a cave in Croatia. By the end, you will not think of Neanderthals as a dead branch. You will think of them as a chapter in the human genome. The standard story goes like this. Modern humans evolved in Africa, spread across the world, and replaced the Neanderthals, who were too different and too few to survive. The Neanderthals left behind bones, tools, and maybe some cave paintings, but nothing else. End of story. That story has a problem. It is not what the DNA says. Let's start in a lab, not in a cave. Back in 2010, an international team led by Svante Pääbo published a draft sequence of the Neanderthal genome. They had extracted DNA from bones found in Vindija Cave in Croatia, bones that were tens of thousands of years old. The paper landed in Science, and it changed human evolution forever. The team compared the Neanderthal genome with genomes from living people, and they found something no one expected. Europeans and Asians share more genetic variants with Neanderthals than Africans do. That was the first hint that modern humans and Neanderthals had met, and that those meetings had consequences. The obvious explanation is sex. Somewhere in the ancient past, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals overlapped, mated, and produced children who survived. Those children carried a mix of both worlds. Their descendants spread across Eurasia, and they carried those Neanderthal segments with them. That is why the percentage exists in human genomes at all. How do researchers even find those pieces? It sounds simple, but it is one of the hardest jobs in genetics. You cannot sequence a living person and just look for Neanderthal-looking DNA, because most of the code is shared by all humans. Instead, researchers compare modern genomes with high-quality ancient genomes, then look for variants that appeared in the ancient group, but not in the African baseline. Every match is a candidate. Every candidate has to survive statistical checks, population modeling, and a mountain of error correction. But here is the strange part. The percentage is not evenly distributed. It is not a smooth smear of ancient DNA across every chromosome. It is a patchwork. Some regions have almost no Neanderthal DNA. Others have a lot. That pattern is not random. It is the result of millions of generations of selection, deleting some segments and keeping others. 2 papers published in 2014 made that point beautifully. One team, led by Sriram Sankararaman, scanned modern human genomes and mapped the Neanderthal segments that survived. They found large stretches where Neanderthal DNA is almost absent, especially in regions involved in gene expression and the brain. They argued that those segments were probably harmful and got purged by natural selection. The other team, led by Vernot and Joshua Akey, built a catalogue of Neanderthal haplotypes hiding in modern genomes. They found that many of the surviving pieces are not random either. Some were beneficial enough to be kept. The 2 papers reached similar conclusions from different angles. Humans mated, mixed, and then natural selection went through the attic, throwing out what did not work and keeping what did. The methods were new for the time. Earlier studies could only say that some modern humans carry a little more Neanderthal DNA than others. The 2014 papers actually mapped the segments, which meant they could ask where the DNA sits and what it does. That turned the conversation from "do we have it?" to "what is it doing?" The shift changed the field now. What did it keep? Here is how to think about it. The genome is a library, and selection is the librarian. Some books were burned, some were shelved in the back. A few were put right by the door where they could be read every day. The books near the door are the ones we can see today. The most famous answer involves immunity. Back in 2011, a team led by Laurent Abbey published a study about HLA genes. Those are the genes that help the immune system recognize foreign proteins, the ones that decide whether a virus looks familiar or not. The team found that modern humans inherited some HLA variants from archaic humans, including Neanderthals. Those variants were not rare. In some populations, they became extremely common. That suggests they helped people survive new pathogens. Think about what that means. When an immune system meets a virus it has never seen, it does not have to start from zero. It can reach into a library of older strategies, some of which were written tens of thousands of years ago by a different kind of human. We are not just running on our own experience. We are running on theirs. That is the immune gene we promised. It is one of the clearest examples of Neanderthal DNA doing real work in a living body. When you get a vaccine, your immune system is being trained by a preview. When you catch a cold, it is being tested by the real thing. Both times, it reaches for whatever worked before, and some of what worked before was inherited. That is the immune gene in action. The second promise was skin. Back in 2016, Corinne Simonti and colleagues, including John Capra, published a study in Science that linked Neanderthal DNA to traits in living people. They looked at medical and trait data from a large European sample, and they found associations between Neanderthal variants and a wide range of things: skin, hair, immunity, mood, sleep, and even some diseases. One of the strongest signals was skin biology. Some Neanderthal variants are associated with actinic keratosis, a rough, scaly patch of skin caused by sun damage. That is not a small footnote. Skin is the largest organ a person has. It is the border, the shield, and the first line of defense. If some of its instructions came from Neanderthals, then the line between us and them is literally drawn on the body. If you have ever burned in the sun, developed a rough patch of skin, or wondered why your face ages the way it does, you are looking at a very old conversation between genes. Skin is where the ancient past becomes visible without a lab test. The third part of the story is risk. Back in 2017, Janet Kelso and Michael Danneman published a deeper analysis of Neanderthal DNA and human traits. They used a large biobank sample, and they found associations with depression, smoking behavior, blood clotting, and skin conditions. Some of the associations are small. Most people with Neanderthal DNA will never notice them. But the effect is real, measurable, and repeated across populations. Does that make you nervous? It does not have to. A small genetic association is not a destiny. It is a nudge, one factor among thousands, and some effects are easier to feel than others. A person who carries a Neanderthal variant for blood clotting will never think that is 40,000 years old. When a doctor mentions the risk, the variant does not care about history. It just does its job. That can sound scary, and the headlines love to make it sound scary, but there is another way to read it. Neanderthal DNA is not a curse that was randomly sprinkled into the genome. It is a set of genetic experiments, some of which worked, some of which did not, and all of which are still being tested in living humans. Let's slow down and talk about what 1 to 4% actually looks like. Imagine the genome as a long book with about 3 billion letters. 1% of that is about 30 million letters. That is not nothing. It is not a footnote. It is a substantial chunk of text, even if it is scattered across the pages. That book has more than one author, Most of the pages were written in Africa, deep in the shared human past. A few chapters were revised later, after our ancestors walked into places where other humans were already living. When you read your own genome, you are reading a manuscript with many hands in it. Your genome is the manuscript, but the percentage also depends on where ancestors lived. People with European ancestry carry roughly 1 to 2% on average. People with East Asian ancestry often carry a little more, sometimes up to 3 or 4%. The difference is probably the result of additional mixing events and different histories of migration. The number on a phone would not be the same if grandparents came from different continents. Here is the part that trips people up. The ancestors of modern Africans also carry Neanderthal DNA, even though Neanderthals are usually described as a Eurasian group. How? The answer is back migration. Modern humans who had already mixed with Neanderthals in the Middle East or Europe later moved back into Africa. Their descendants carried those Neanderthal segments south, so the no Neanderthal DNA in Africa story was never quite true. It is more accurate to say that Neanderthal DNA is distributed unevenly across the world, and the reason is movement. Think of it as a boomerang. People left Africa with one genome, picked up new chapters along the way, and some of those people went home. The genome that came back was not identical to the one that left. That is how ancestry becomes a loop instead of a line. Your ancestry is a loop too. That is a nice reminder that human history is not a series of clean boxes. It is a web of roots. There is a strange consequence of all that movement. The percentage of Neanderthal DNA in any one person is not a measure of how Neanderthal they are. It is a measure of history, of who passed through where, and of which segments survived. Selection. Two people with the same ancestry can carry completely different pieces. The number is a map, not a label. Now, let's talk about the other hominin in the room. The Neanderthals were not the only archaic humans modern people met. There were also Denisovans, a group known mostly from a tiny finger bone and a few teeth from a cave in Siberia. Humans mixed with them too. In some populations, Denisovan DNA reaches up to 5 or 6%. Why does that matter for this video? Because it shows that the Neanderthal story is not an exception. Mixing was the rule. Every time modern humans moved into a new place, they seemed to have found old neighbors and made new families. The genome is full of evidence of those meetings. One of the most striking examples is a gene called EPAS1. It helps people survive at high altitude. Some populations in the Himalayas carry a version of this gene that came from Denisovans, and it helps their blood use oxygen more efficiently at altitude. If anyone has ever wondered how people live in thin mountain air, part of the answer is written in DNA inherited from another kind of human. That is what admixture can do. It is not just a record of sex. It is a way for one population to borrow solutions from another. The Neanderthal immune genes may have been the same kind of loan, granted long before money or borders existed. Now, when did the Neanderthal meetings happen? The genetic evidence points to a window roughly 50 to 60,000 years ago, when modern humans were expanding out of Africa and into the Middle East. That region was a crossroads. It was already home to Neanderthals, and the two groups overlapped there for a long time. The mixture that entered your family tree probably started in that contact zone. There may also have been more than one pulse of mixing. The genetic evidence suggests multiple encounters, not a single event. Some happened in the Middle East, some in Europe, and some may have happened later as populations moved and met again. Each pulse added another layer to the archive. This is where the title of the original video comes in. Does Neanderthal DNA put a ceiling on the Out of Africa story? The phrase sounds strange, but here is the logic. If modern humans outside Africa carry Neanderthal DNA, then the story of a single clean expansion out of Africa has to be revised. The expansion was not clean. It was messy, repeated, and full of contact. Neanderthal DNA is one of the clearest signs of that mess. The ceiling is not a wall. It is more like a watermark. It does not stop the story from moving forward, but it marks every page that came after. Once you learn to see it, You cannot unsee it. Some researchers have argued that the presence of Neanderthal DNA in Europeans and Asians means modern humans did not simply replace older populations. They absorbed them, at least in part. That is not the same as saying Neanderthals survived as a species. It is saying their genes survived, and those genes tell a more complicated story than they lost. Let's look at selection again, because it is the most underrated part of this story. When the 2014 studies looked at which Neanderthal segments survived, they found something surprising. Many of the surviving segments are in areas that control gene activity, especially in the immune system. That means natural selection did not just tolerate them. It actively kept them, probably because they solved problems. New pathogens were one problem. New environments were another. When modern humans moved out of Africa, they entered worlds with different climates, different foods, and different diseases. The immune variants inherited from Neanderthals may have been an instant toolkit for dealing with those unfamiliar threats. People did not need to wait for a new mutation. The answer was already in the genome of the people who had lived there for hundreds of thousands of years. That is one of the most beautiful ideas in human evolution. The species we often think of as our extinct rival may have been the reason our ancestors survived their new world. But the picture is not one way. Some Neanderthal DNA was useful, some was neutral, and some was harmful. The harmful segments were often removed by selection. That is why modern genomes do not contain a full Neanderthal copy. They contain a filtered version, edited by millions of deaths and births. The filter is not a person, it is the process itself. Let us be honest about the limits, though. Most of the Neanderthal DNA in the genome does not have a clear job. It is probably neutral, or nearly neutral. It sits in chromosomes like an old book, on a shelf, mostly unread. The genes we can name, the HLA variants, the skin variants, the disease associations, those are the exceptions. They are the visible work. The rest is quiet. That is not a problem for science. It is just a reminder that genomes are not clean blueprints. They are archives. Is the Neanderthal DNA still changing? The answer is yes. In the slowest possible way. Natural selection does not stop. Every generation, some genetic variants become a little more common or a little more rare. The Neanderthal segments are still being sorted, still being tested, still being edited. The percentages we quote today are a snapshot, not a final answer. The oldest Neanderthal DNA is also some of the most useful. It gives researchers a baseline for what humans looked like before the mixture. Without those ancient genomes, we could not tell which parts of the modern genome came from archaic humans. The caves of Europe and Siberia are not just museums. They are control groups. Some researchers are also looking at whether Neanderthal DNA influences disease risk in ways that matter for medicine. If a variant inherited from Neanderthals raises the risk of blood clots or depression, then knowing where it came from could help doctors understand why some treatments work better for some people. The ancient past is becoming part of modern medicine. There are still gaps. Most studies of Neanderthal traits use people of European ancestry because that is where the largest genetic datasets come from. Other populations are studied less. That means the list of Neanderthal effects we can name today is probably incomplete. The next decade of genetics will likely add new entries, and some of them will surprise us. That is a strange thought. A doctor might one day look at lab results and say, "This came from a Neanderthal," not as an insult, as a clue. Maybe one day that doctor will be you. Let's zoom out. The genome is not a scoreboard. It does not keep track of which species won. It keeps track of connections. Every cell in a body contains layers of history, some from Africa, some from Europe, some from encounters we can no longer reconstruct. The story is not a ladder. It is a braided river. For decades, the story of human origins was told as a victory lap. Modern humans were smarter, better, and more adaptable, and they replaced everyone else. The genome tells a different story. It is not about replacement, it is about encounter. It is about people who did not just conquer new places, but also connected with the people they found there. That does not make the Neanderthals less fascinating. It makes them more important. They are not a separate branch that ended. They are a source, an influence, a set of experiments that are still running in us. Here is the part I want you to remember the next time a throat feels tight. The immune system is not a new machine. It is an inheritance. It contains layers of ancient decisions, including some that were made by people whose bones were not found until the 20th century. When a body fights a cold, it is using a library that is much older than the person holding it. So what should we do with the 1 to 4%? We could ignore it, which is what most people do. We could treat it as a curiosity, or we could treat it as what it is, proof that the boundary between human groups has never been as clean as we like to pretend. But you are the archive. The next time you look in the mirror, you might not see a Neanderthal, but if you look at the genome, they are there. Not as ghosts, as contributors. They did not disappear, they became you. And that scratchy throat on a grey Tuesday. It is just the ancient immune system doing its job.